This is a Ferret MKII. Now we've done the Ferret MKII before, but I particularly wanted this one to be featured because it's fitted with vigilant missiles on both sides of the turret. It's a Ferret MKII/6.
Please remember to like, subscribe or click the little notification bell if you don't want to miss out on these videos. And I'd just like to say thank you to all our patrons for making this possible. Please join them if you can.
Really, the Vigilant was one of the very first missiles, wire-guided missiles used by the British Army. We had tried the Australian Malkara first, a great big heavyweight thing, which I've shown you before on a vehicle. But that doesn't really count. This missile system, which is actually the Vickers-Armstrong Vigilant originally, is the real first generation type of missile used. They're quite a neat idea. You've got two missiles here. They're in their launching boxes, which stay with the turret normally until they're fired off. They're fired from inside by the chap using a guidance system. The things are fired by, I think it's a solid fueled rocket motor actually. They're fired out this way. He then picks them up within about 150 yards. He picks them up on his sight and guides them by remote control by a wire trailed from the rocket towards his target. Now the limited range of these things is about 1,500 yards, about the same in meters I suppose. And oh, I don't know, it was too close, to be quite honest. A tank could pick up this thing at the same time as it fired, and the tank could fire at it and destroy it, and the chap guiding the rocket, before it even hit his tank. And the fact that his tank could be moving would make it much more difficult anyway. They were a marvellous idea. Everyone said, oh, for the first time, a man can go out in the field just equipped with one of these in a box and he can hunt tanks. Well, he can if he wants to, but he's bound to get killed in the end, and he's never going to hit a tank because it just doesn't work. But still, it leaves the countryside covered in wire anyway. It isn't really the most effective anti-tank weapon, but it was one of the first of its day, although the Germans, of course, have been developing them during the Second World War. You've got two missiles on the vehicle. They're either side of the turret, which is the old Ferret MKII turret with the Browning machine gun in. They're on a common bar which runs across the turret, which takes care of their elevation. And I don't know, there should be, we'll try and photograph them if they are there. There should be two more spare missiles carried on the left side. They're just stowed there, and if it survives with these first two, then the idea is you put the second two in and go looking for more tanks, if you're balmy enough. But that's the general idea of these things. And of its kind, it was very original. When the very first ones came out, they were sold even to the USA, which is absolutely remarkable. It put Britain in the lead as far as wire-guided anti-tank missiles go. The French had actually introduced them first. Theirs were much cheaper, much smaller than ours, and didn't have the remote control guiding system quite so effective as on this one. And they tended to be popular because they were the first. But Britain came up with a much more expensive one, this Vigilant, and it was not only one of the very first, it was semi-automatic, and that made it much easier to operate. They all require a lot of skill, and in fact it's more the operator, the human link in the chain, who's the problem. He's got to absolutely keep his eye on the target when guiding the missile onto the tank. And it's got to be a tank, obviously, within 1,500 yards of him. And if he strays for a second or two from the target to look at something else or scratch himself, then he's lost it. He's lost the missile and he's lost the target which has gone, and that's why it really can wipe them out. So it was a good idea at the time, but only at the time. It would be no good doing it now. Now this is actually a Ferret as well. It's a Ferret MKII. And it's quite an unusual vehicle. It's based on the big wheel Ferret, the Mark IV. So it has larger diameter wheels than the ordinary Ferret. It was just that bit better across country and had a bit more ground clearance for one thing. It also had a complete amphibious unit. You can see this, you can see the top of it anyway. All around the edge here is a raisable screen which comes up to above the height of the turret. Inside it's a corrugated thing of folded plastic, and it's clear at the front so that the driver can have some rough idea where he's going, which isn't very handy, I suppose. Quite an unusual feature for an early vehicle. It later became a very fashionable thing in the British Army to have everything with these amphibious screens. But they were first of all fitted to they wanted to fit them to the ordinary Ferret, but they couldn't to begin with, so they only fitted them to the big wheel Ferrets, like the Mark IV, and this one, the Mark V. So it was the first attempt to make a vehicle fully amphibious. It actually was driven in the water by its wheels, going round, which I think is a complete and utter waste of time, but never mind, that's what they did. They didn't have a propeller or anything else to help it along. They just had it thrashing the water with its wheels. It was four-wheel drive, obviously. In fact, the chassis, the wheel diameter and the chassis are about the same as the Fox, the armoured car that followed it. So there was a bit of continuity there, even though it's probably a bit difficult to see. The reason we've selected this vehicle is because the turret that's fitted here, it's actually required for the swing-fire missile. Now the swing-fire was developed by Ferret Aviation, later became part of British Aircraft Corporation, but it was Ferret Aviation to begin with, and they were really the second generation of wire-guided missile. They had for a start a range of 4,000 metres, which was a lot better than the 1,500 metres of the Vigilant. It also had a speed of about 185 metres per second, which allowed the guy inside with the controller a means to guide the missile, but it still required the man to pay a lot of attention to the sights that he was holding to make sure he hit the target in the first place. If it hit, the missile has a shaped charge heat type warhead, and it will literally blow up any tank of any armour thickness at all that came close enough to be hit, and daft enough if you ask me, but still. So that's it, that's the vehicle. There are two more missiles carried on the vehicle. They're actually stored in these containers here. One to the right, one to the left of the hull of the Ferret, and that's what they're for. It's just an armoured container for a spare missile. So the thing has got a bit of extra firepower. It raises the missile here. The reason they're called swing fire, by the way, isn't just the usual reason of the firm looking for another name. They had a reason for it, and it was that this vehicle could be fired by remote control, or at least it meant that the man in the turret, the vehicle commander, could dismount, could then plug in an extension lead and take the sight and controller with him, and it wouldn't matter if the vehicle was parked out of sight in a little dip or whatever, and it didn't even have to face the direction of the target. What it meant was that when it was fired, even if it was at 90 degrees to the way it was meant to go, the thing would sort itself out and come onto the line of sight that the chap was holding within the first sort of second or two of being fired. And just that ability to steer, which was quite an ability in its day, was the reason it was called swing fire. So I'm told anyway. And that's the turret is actually a bit of an oddity. It's made of welded aluminium alloys. And it's advertised as the first aluminium tank in the British Army. Not the first aluminium tank built, but the first in the British Army. But it actually only applied to the turret because the vehicle's hull was built of steel, as it always had been. So the second vehicle, which I mentioned just now, the Fox, was an aluminium vehicle and had more than just a turret in aluminium, or at least aluminium alloy. So, but that's what distinguishes it. When they originally planned this vehicle, they planned to build them in their hundreds. It was seen as a large vehicle that could take on anything, tanks, any old thing, and blow it apart. And by the time they built about 50 of them, they changed their minds. They decided to make reconnaissance vehicles tracked. So we had the Scorpion and that family, which included the Striker, which had a box of missiles on the back. Now, to begin with, the Striker was going to have this turret fitted to it. So it would actually be you'd have the hull of the Striker with the turret on top rotating. But actually, as built, the Striker has I think it's 5 swing fires in a box at the back which lifts up, the same way as they lift up there. And that's how you tell them apart. But that's how this thing works. It would, as I say, destroy any vehicle it came up against. And with a range of about 400 metres, 4,000 metres, it had the power to knock out a tank at a reasonable range. The difficulty always was the man behind the sights. It's got to be a human being behind the sights, and that is the most vulnerable, because even though it's travelling faster, it's travelling at a greater distance. The chap has got to be glued, literally glued to the target to be able to pick it up and knock it out. If he deviates from a second or two from watching where it's going, the missile wanders off and is lost. And that really is the problem. They had a lot of trouble with swing fire to begin with as well. It left a nasty cloud of smoke when it was fired, which meant that if the chap in the tank had his eyes open, he could more or less trace where the smoke would originated from. And then he had something to shoot back at. And I tell you, all you needed was the round from the tank to hit this thing before the missile had reached the tank, and the whole thing was over. The whole thing finished. And it still left that long stretch of wire, which was reeled out the back of the missile, and they left that sort of draped across the countryside, which is all very well. The other interesting thing is, and it'll only interest our Scottish friends, is that they've spelt Kirkcudbright wrong. They spelt Kirkcudbright as Kirkcudbrick. And as anyone knows who's seen the real thing, it's actually Kirkcudbright. But it's the way it's said in Scottish that makes it sound like Kirkcudbrick. And the Australians, not knowing the difference, spelled it as Kirkcudbrick. And we've left it, we felt that it was great fun to insult the Scots and the Australians in one go. It's shown on the side of this vehicle. This was the actual vehicle used in the trials in Australia, and that's why it's on there. So it's something to watch out for.